All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. You don't recognize my voice unless you listen to the New England Lean podcast, which I haven't done any episodes of recently. So even if you did used to listen, you still might not recognize my voice. But I am Paul Critchley, and I am happy to be guest hosting the podcast today and interviewing our fearless leader, Mark Graban. Mr. Graban, how are you?
Paul, I'm doing great. Happy to have you get back into the podcasting saddle, even if it's just a one-off here. Maybe you'll get back into your podcast someday. You still got the gear.
I still got the gear. I didn't lease it. I did a rent to own.
But thank you for accepting my offer to have you turn the tables on me here.
Thank you. I hope you brought your A game, because I got all kinds of hard hitting.
I hope so. This might have been a mistake, but we'll see.
Well, you could always just not publish it, I guess, if this thing goes south on you. All right, so let's jump right in. Congratulations, you have a new book coming out.
Yeah, thank you. The Mistakes That Make Us. As we're recording this, I don't have the books yet, so I'm going to hold up a cover for those looking on YouTube. The Mistakes That Make Us: Cultivating a Culture of Learning and Innovation. Brand new book, and I hope people will check it out and read it. Well, check it out, library. That would be fine too. Buy the book, read the book. The main thing is I hope the book is helpful in some way. I think having a culture of learning and innovation is something we would benefit from, and to shift from a culture of being punitive about mistakes to being one that's more constructive, I think is ultimately better if our goal is to reduce the number of mistakes happening. To some people, that is still maybe counterintuitive, maybe not to this audience, but we can try to help influence and remind or try to convince others that shifting away from the punitive approach is actually the better path forward for driving mistakes down. So we touch on that in the book. We talk about mistake proofing. It's not a book that looks like a lean book on the cover, and it's not all about lean, but hopefully it's going to introduce some people to concepts that they might not have come across before.
Nice. So I think there's enough of those out there anyway. I mean, let's be honest, it's been around 30 some odd years now. I think there's plenty of books that people can choose from as like the how-to. Yeah. I get excited about some of the newer books that, like yours, some of the other ones that friends of ours have published in recent years. That's kind of more of the storytelling and kind of gets what I consider to be kind of towards the respect for people side, to talk about culture and how important that stuff is. Because, as a fellow engineer, you can appreciate, we tend towards tools, I think, sometimes, and obviously that's important, but that's not the whole picture. So I really like kind of some of the, in books and some of the conversations I'm seeing online that are happening surrounding, like I said, culture, respect for people, that kind of it. So, I just want to jump right in. So I'll jump in and back up, I guess. So you actually have a podcast, right? Mistakes That Make Us. So can you just tell us a little bit?
Slight mistake, though. I'm going to cut it. My favorite mistake. Podcast.
I had that written down and I boned it up. So there you go. There's
mistake. It's all right. Mistakes happen, right? The count is Paul 1, and we'll keep track of how many mistakes. I'm going to make mistakes too.
I was going to say, if we can put a graphic up of a little tally mark, that'll be awesome. But so can you just talk a little bit? How'd you come up with that idea? Because that's been going on for 2 or 3 years now, I think, right?
September 2020 is when I launched the podcast. And this lean podcast that people are listening to here, somebody I started in the summer of 2006. So 17 years now. And, if you do a podcast long enough, you somehow get on the list of these PR firms that will send out pitches, people to interview. And very rarely are those firms pitching somebody who is like a perfect fit for a lean podcast. But I got so I would say no to people that I thought, boy, that would have been interesting. I'd like to meet them, but I just can't figure out how to make it fit the lean podcast. And then I think it was May of 2020, June, early pandemic times. I wasn't traveling for work, trying to just keep busy and doing stuff. And got an email pitching Kevin Harrington, who was one of the sharks on season 1 of Shark Tank. And I thought, wow, I would like to talk to him. It would be fun to meet him and his co-author for a book he had coming out and he was promoting. I don't know how to make it fit. So anyways, there was some back and forth and brainstorming with the PR people of, do I start kind of just one option would have been just kind of a very broad business podcast, might have been a, dime a dozen sort of podcast. And the PR people were actually kind of keen on the one idea of a podcast about mistakes. And so I thought, okay, well, let's try. Kevin Harrington and his co-author, Mark Tim, said yes. And they both came on and really, they crushed it. I mean, they didn't do the whole, I was a little afraid that it would be like the job interview of like, Paul, tell me your greatest weakness. And the answer is something like, man, I just care too much and I work too hard and I'm too focused on results. I'm like, okay, well, if it was the equivalent of that, it probably wouldn't have made for a very interesting podcast. But, Kevin in particular told, a really vulnerable story about a mistake that, as he put it, could have put his company out of business, and he told that on the podcast. So it's one of the lead stories, in the book. And so with that, I had N equals 2, I guess I would say. It was 1 episode, 2 guests. Could I find other people willing to share a similarly compelling, not a humble brag mistake story? And thankfully people have. We're at over 215 episodes in that series so far. My favorite mistake. So I think not a mistake starting that podcast. When you start anything new, you don't know, right? Is this going to work? Is it going to be a mistake? I felt confident enough to try, but then again, the stakes were low, right? If it flamed out after a couple of episodes, then okay, fine, so be it, But I think I had some legs, and kind of roundabout way then is what led to the book project.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, and I got to give you a lot of credit, you and I chat often anyways, but I do give you a lot of credit because just as you mentioned, I see so many folks that, not analysis paralysis, but they try to overanalyze these things and look at it from different angles, and that's smart. But at a certain point, right, PDCA's got to kick in, and we just say, you know what, the risk reward here, let's just try it and see what happens. Right. And if it sticks, awesome. And if it doesn't work, oh, well, I tried. But I see it happen so often, whether we're doing client work or just, I just keynoted at a local bank branch, and that was kind of a similar motif, I guess, is that as I was talking and I was getting questions, it was, well, how do they asked about critical thinking skills, and it was all under the umbrella of, because we don't want to screw this up. And I just wonder, out of, you said what, 215 episodes, right, that you've recorded? Right. Have you seen a pattern like that emerge, or what's your feeling? Do you see anything with your guests that, you've learned that maybe, you cover in the book or anything like that?
Well, both. I mean, there's a lot of guests on the podcast. There's different types of mistakes, right? So the people who are entrepreneurs, they're in a startup, they're doing innovative things. That's a situation where you maybe don't just expect mistakes, but almost welcome them, or realize, okay, if we have an idea that we're going to launch, and if we don't fall into the analysis paralysis trap, we're going to launch, we're going to learn, we're going to iterate. I think those stories are really powerful. And, I think that combined with even process improvement thinking I've been exposed to from, former Toyota people, if you're testing a countermeasure or testing a solution as part of a plan, do, study, adjust cycle, you plan, right? And you maybe have this 85% confidence level that, okay, well, this doesn't seem like a horrible idea. But rather than, I think there's a mindset difference, and I do write about this, the difference between knowing that my solution is perfect, so let's just go implement it or roll it out, is a different mindset than feeling like we've thought this through. We've tried to poke holes in it. We've made it better, but it's probably not perfect. So let's do a small test of change and let's see what happens. And if we have the ability to kind of honestly evaluate the study and adjust cycles. And that's where one of the big themes in the book is psychological safety. To have the psychological safety to try something and not be perfect, to be able to adjust instead of having to stubbornly rationalize what we did and this facade of perfection will actually, I think, be far more likely to iterate our way to success. So there's this balance here of like, it's not an excuse to throw whatever random ideas against the wall like spaghetti. It's not licensed to be reckless, but I think it's this idea. And I think the launch of My Favorite Mistake was similar, where we talked through the idea with people. It wasn't impulsive, right? I mean, I talked to people. I didn't do full-blown market research. I made sure that I had, some guests, not just one, before launching, but I was, willing to accept the risk of like, well, what's the worst that could happen? It's not a rocket blowing up over somebody's town, right? It's just, if it's yet another podcast that sort of withers after 3 or 5 episodes, then I was willing to accept that risk.
Mm-hmm. Nice. I'm going to ask you to be a little tiny vulnerable, and I'm sure you've probably gotten this question already, and it might have been in an episode and maybe I missed it. How about you? Mistakes you've made. What's your favorite mistake?
Ooh. There's two answers. I mean, I have gotten asked this, and the more flippant but totally sincere answer was that my one favorite mistake was taking a job at Dell Computer in 1999. I ended up leaving there after about 2 years to go to a startup software company. I realized pretty quickly that wasn't a great fit for me culturally. I didn't want to stay there a long time. I did meet my wife through that, right? So, that's making a positive, 21 and a half years married now, even though the Dell job was 21 months, we'll call it. Sometimes we make a positive out of something that's a negative. The more serious answer is actually, the type of story that was in the earlier book, Practicing Lean, which is similar vibe, if you will, of kind of looking back and sharing mistakes and reminding myself first off, and trying to remind others, hey, we all make mistakes, but let's learn from them. Let's not be too hard on people who make mistakes when they're new to something. I made a lot of mistakes, and one was, my last manufacturing job at Honeywell. So this was still, it was the first decade of my career. At that point, it's probably 5 years of direct manufacturing experience. Some time at the startup and grad school in between. Of implementing change and failing, of being told, through Honeywell to get my basically lean black belt certification, you need to go do this project. And it was in a production department, kind of cellular manufacturing with different operations running at different times. And there's changeovers and basically designing, it was a technically correct production Kanban system of like visual reorder points and trying to get the changeover time down, but looking at, the sequence and the timing of changeovers, and basically nobody used it. That was humbling. And I think sometimes people use the word humbling in a mistaken way. I think I'm using the word accurately here, right? It was humbling. Now, to my credit or my own defense, like I was trying to engage the people working in that area, but it was not a culture that really did that. It was not a culture that would allow us to shut down production to really work with people. So there were some systemic factors, but there was a lesson learned, or at least trying to reflect on, I could have put more effort and more emphasis into that, even in the face of, a culture that was, not Toyota-like, but trying to do lean projects. Mm-hmm. But part of the lesson there is trying to avoid situations where that might happen again as a consultant.
Right. And that makes sense. I'd like to, I certainly have stories like that as well. There's one I tell that I worked at a place. I was the engineering manager of a manufacturing plant. And we had a systemic issue where we had a hand assembly, and there's 5 or 7 pieces, and they had to go in a certain order. And we would get them out of order. We'd be missing pieces because we're doing hundreds and hundreds of assemblies a day. And it's all done by hand. And it was our job as the engineers to try to mistake proof it. So we looked at scales, we looked at high-speed cameras, and just because of the nature of what we did and, weights and costs, it's none of that stuff would work. Well, one of my engineers finally built this pretty slick little light curtain system. So it was probably 5 feet long by 8 inches high by 8 inches deep. And basically you had to break the light curtains in order in a certain sequence to make sure that you got the parts that you needed. Right. So we do all this stuff and it works really well. We roll it out on the floor, and every time somebody screws up, a light goes off and a buzzer sounds, and the buzzer's loud. It's like the loudest one we could find. So I hear we roll it out there. The first couple of days, I hear the buzzer all the time, and then gradually it tapers off. And then a couple of weeks go by and I don't hear anything. And we're high-fiving each other in the engineering office. We're thinking, we're awesome. We're the best there is. Right up until I walked out on the shop floor, because what happened was they defeated the whole purpose of it. They broke the sequence correctly once, and instead of grabbing one part, they grabbed a whole handful. So they had little piles of nuts, bolts, and washers in front of the light curtain. And so I tell that story often, but the mistake we made was we didn't involve the folks that were going to be using it. Right.
I thought I thought the story was going to end with they disabled the loud buzzer, but they avoided triggering it but people are clever, right? So why, the ideal would be engaging them and using that creativity for Kaizen instead of being creative and circumventing mistake proofing attempts, right? Or worse, people circumventing safety guarding, where that comes back to a cultural mistake, a cultural issue of emphasizing, numbers. And, I read a sad story last year of manufacturing worker getting killed. The supervisor had basically encouraged, if not taught them, how to circumvent the safety guarding, and this big boom came around and hit the worker in the head and probably killed them instantly. And these cultural issues around putting safety first, and thinking of the problem solving that if there had been these other problems, more effective problem solving would have solved the jams or whatever problems in a way that wouldn't have, that would have kept the safety mechanisms in place instead of being circumvented. So there's, there's principles, there's culture, there's problem solving. A lot of this is all very all interconnected.
Right, which is sort of where we started the conversation, but I think it makes a lot of sense because, like in my example, our hearts were in the right place. And there's a lot, trust me, there's a lot of things we tried before this. I mean, this whole project was 6-8 months long, and we tried this, it didn't work. We tried that, it didn't work. So there was some iterative back and forth but finally, I refer to it as the constant pressure of production. And whether you're, making parts or providing a service, it's, we all have jobs because the organization that we work at has customers, and we're trying to meet those customers' needs. And like you said, sometimes we apply our creativity on how to, I don't want to necessarily say cut corners, but we assume some risk that maybe if we had a different type of culture that didn't allow those things, then, it might take a little longer, but, it gets back to the risk reward, I guess, piece of it.
Well, but let me turn it back on you a little bit then and ask, what was the moment of truth? What was the reaction of seeing the workers with their piles, and you learned, what they had done? What was the response from you or others?
So good question. I remember at first, I could feel my face getting red because I think I was angry because, again, we had spent a lot of time and effort trying to figure this whole thing out. That I'd say that passed pretty quickly. And I forgot to tell you the part of the story. That buzzer lasted about 2 days, by the way. And then there was a key that the supervisor needed to turn it off. And the whole idea was he had the key. He would have to come over, turn the buzzer off, investigate, find out what happened. He had, I think, 30 people in 4 or 5 different departments. So he just left the key in there, and he just left it in the off position. So that lasted, like I said, not long.
But see, that's understandable, though. That comes back to system design. This is not a Toyota plant with the ratio of team members to team leader to have that kind of instant response.
Right. Exactly. And that was exactly the problem. So I remember I was a little angry at first. I didn't, and I'm not a yelling type of dude. So I didn't yell at anybody, but I just remember asking this. I'm like, how is this happening? And he and I we're actually to this day, good friends.
Yeah.
So I asked him, what is going on? He's like, well, they don't like it. It gets in the way. It's, in retrospect, there was a lot of input we should have and needed from them, should have gotten and needed. And we just didn't ask and that's my fault as engineering manager. I told, my folks what to do. I didn't recognize the importance of getting buy-in and investment from everybody on the shop floor. I just assumed, and I was, in my defense, I will say this is 25 years ago. So I was much younger, much more naive. I'd like to think I'm smarter now. But still, I see that same mentality, same mistake happen sometimes. And it's not because people don't want to do it. And this is one of my biggest sticking points when we start talking about culture and mistakes. I firmly believe the vast majority of people's hearts are in the right place.
Yeah.
And everybody's trying to do their jobs the best that they can. But it's the interactions between people and between disciplines. It just gets so messy.
Yeah.
So that was going to kind of lead into my next question for you is, again, after 200 some odd episodes, what do you think, what advice would you give to leaders and managers, so they can incorporate a culture to encourage risk taking and that mistakes are okay and psychological safety? Is there a nutshell umbrella statement you can make?
Yeah, there's 2. I think, the one that comes from patterns in the podcast, and some of it comes from my friend Karen Ross, who was a guest in episode number 3. I've got a coffee mug that I've had made. This is a long story here. This is a broken handled version that's basically a pen holder / crud junk holder. My insurance card, the information wasn't showing there. Nobody could pause the video, get any, no identity theft here. But there's this side of the mug that I often use to drink coffee, non-broken one. Shipping mistake, by the way, from the company that made the mugs. It says here, be kind to yourself. And the implicit is, try to be kind to others when they make mistakes. Nobody is perfect. We all make mistakes. The important thing is continuing to learn from our mistakes. So there's patterns from the podcast guests of, even if there were other factors involved, there's this healthy habit of taking responsibility for your own actions, even if there are things you wish others had done differently. You can't control that. You can learn from that. You can try to do things differently moving forward. But I think there's this pattern that I admire and appreciate of not just telling the story, but then secondly, not blaming and pointing fingers at others, taking ownership of the mistake. I think that's a great habit. And then not so much directly from the podcast, but from things I was learning in parallel. And then finally did get to interview on my favorite mistake, Timothy Clark, the author of a book called The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. I'd taken some training classes with him virtually and through his company Leader Factor, and really helped me connect the dots on the advice around how do we build psychological safety so that people feel safe, among other things, speaking up to admit mistakes, to point out mistakes that weren't theirs, to bring improvement ideas, forward. The two key countermeasures for how do leaders build psychological safety. For one, it's not trying to declare you should feel safe. Paul, this is a safe environment now. There's no punishment zone. You should feel safe speaking up about mistakes. Well, you may or may not. He's shaking his head no, right? No. That's for each person to decide. Has it been demonstrated that it's safe? And so the two key countermeasures are really just either A, for leaders, modeling vulnerable acts, and then B, rewarding. Or was it 1 and 2, A and B? First, there's a mistake for me, I think. Modeling vulnerable behaviors such as admitting mistakes, saying you were wrong, saying I don't know, and then rewarding others when they do the same. Like it's mostly through action. Like you can try to encourage people, but if the actions don't align with the words, people will learn, they will protect themselves, and they will keep quiet. They will hide mistakes. I saw a lot of that in General Motors era, especially under the first traditional yelling and screaming plant manager. And I can only imagine, Paul, your situation, if that happened in my GM plant, there would have been yelling. Mm-hmm. What's wrong with you people? Don't you care about quality? Blah, 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 blah. And stop. There's this lesson of stop blaming bad apples, quote unquote. It's not bad apples. It's bad systems. Right. People want to do good work. And, when we engage them and have alignment around goals and what we're trying to accomplish and make it safe for people to try things. Now, at the same time, Paul, hopefully your leaders above you didn't get all punitive, with you, hey, why didn't you know better? Oh, you really bleeped that up. Or okay, you learned, right? You did your best, you tried, you learned. And I try to, again, back to being kind to myself, of not beating myself up over different mistakes that I make. I think that's one of the first steps to trying to also extend that to others.
Right. And that's an important point. I actually had a CEO boss of mine one time, and this is, I'll tell you, not that long ago, mm-hmm. about maybe 15 years ago. She told me once, and I forget the context. I think we were talking about something that had happened in manufacturing, and I think I had said something or done something, and as we were talking about it, I'm like, yeah, I really should go apologize and take ownership or something like that. And she said, she looked me dead in the eye and she said, never apologize. And and again, I was getting a little older now, and I'm like, why? That doesn't seem, in my head, I'm thinking that doesn't seem right. And she said, oh no. She goes, you never say the words, I'm sorry, because it shows weakness.
No, it shows strength though.
Right. Exactly. And that's the part she didn't get, quite honestly. I worked there for a few years, and it became more and more apparent to me that it was a little bit of a house of cards. It was a lot of talk, a lot of action, and those two things were at opposite ends of the normal distribution. Yeah. There's a lot of great talk going on, but when it came right down to it, it was not I wouldn't call it toxic, but you could see toxic from where we were.
Yeah. But there's that human interaction of you get taught as a kid, if you do something wrong, say I'm sorry, not some sort of conditional, if you're upset, I apologize. No, just apologize and state, what you did wrong. And people respect that, and in the healthcare realm, there's studies that show when a physician or a surgeon apologizes for a mistake, they get sued less often. A lot of times, patients and their families get litigious because they're mad about the mistake. They're even more upset and offended by the denials, the stonewalling, and I'm not saying, well, okay, just make all the mistakes you want, just apologize. There are some mistakes in healthcare that we should be working really hard to prevent so that they are truly, quote unquote, never events. That's different than situations where we're trying to be innovative or do creative process improvement problem solving. But back to the general point of like why people say, oh well, it's just business, or this idea that you can't be authentically human at work. That does seem outdated, or people seem to want to be able to be themselves, which is in Tim Clark's framework, stage 1 of those 4 stages of psychological safety. Can you be your authentic self? Now, that's not licensed to be a jerk and say, hey, psychological safety, I'm being authentic. But are you feeling accepted, included, and respected by your team, by your boss, by your company? That's stage 1. If people don't have that, it's hard to ask them then to feel safe taking risks, to learn, to contribute, and to challenge the status quo. If people don't feel accepted, included, and respected, you can tell them all day long, you should be challenging the status quo. And they're like, no.
Why would I do that?
I'm good. It's safer not to challenge the status quo. It's not best for the company, right? But that's where the role of leaders is to help build psychological safety, instead of saying, hey, be brave, be courageous, it's your duty. No, reduce the risk and danger, and people will speak up.
Right. Exactly. And that's, I talk a lot about, the quote from Steve Jobs, which, multifaceted, lots of, depending on who you listen to, he wasn't the nicest guy, but he has a quote that I like. We don't hire smart people so we can tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they can tell us what to do.
Yeah.
And it's always interesting to me that as organizations, we struggle with that sometimes, because as we get, quote, promoted, now all of a sudden we're, somehow smarter than everybody else, and we have access to the oracles and all this other ridiculousness that I don't know if it's throwback from the Industrial Revolution or like a pseudo military hierarchy I don't know why. I retire, it's going to be my PhD thesis, I guess, on it. But
this dynamic of the higher up that you go, the more all-knowing and omnipotent and infallible you're supposed to be. And that's nonsense.
Right. But I've had jobs where I was, engineering manager, plant manager, and there were people that said that to me. They're like, well, you should know this. Like, why would I know this? Why? Right. I have no more knowledge. And it wasn't even something, I forget. It was it wasn't COVID, because this was long before COVID showed up, but it was something like that. And I'm like, I see the same news you see. I don't have, we don't get there's not a double secret manager newsletter that the Illuminati sends out that I get and you don't. It's just,
Yeah, but when you punish someone for asking that question, so this is stage 2 learner safety in the psychological safety approach. When you scold someone or punish them or embarrass them, especially in front of others, what you should have known that. Well, they're going to learn to stop asking questions, and they might be now guessing or faking it. And whether that leads to some sort of mix-up in patient safety problem, or some sort of employee safety risk or quality problem, that it just hurts performance when you scold people instead of rewarding them. I'll tell a quick story. I remember once I had a primary care physician who stopped and thought about something, and he said, hang on, I'll be right back. He leaves the room. I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. I don't know if he had to go to the bathroom. It wasn't really clear, but okay, he left. That's fine. And he came back in and he apologized. And he said, oh, I had to look something up in whatever such and such guide. I'm sorry. And I'm like, no, don't apologize. Thank you for taking the time to go look it up instead of trying to pretend like you know everything. And that's cultural. Like John Toussaint told a story that I heard once where he was a young ER doc, he was internal medicine. Anyway, he was a young doctor, got scolded for carrying some sort of guidebook around in his pocket that, you're supposed to memorize these things. And that's just a ridiculous expectation. Right. So I think I rewarded him. I certainly thought more of the doctor that he was going to take the time to go look it up instead of guessing and maybe being wrong. And whatever, I don't even remember what it was, but we try to reward those moments, and I think we can do the same in a workplace.
Right. Absolutely. There's no reason, right? And like you just said, you don't remember what it was, but you remember that he did that, and you probably always will. Right?
Yeah.
So, Mark, if I may, and I guess I can because I'm the host.
You are.
There's something that I usually do on my podcast called affectionately the wicked fun part, which I think you went to Northeastern. Did you? Or Northwestern?
Another mistake, Paul. Northwestern. But Northeastern is in Boston. And so you're I could see why you'd say Northeastern.
That's what, so that was my planned segue for the wicked part, because it's a Boston,
I did spend time in Boston though, so I know some of the vernacular.
All right. Just don't try to fake the accent, because we'll know.
No, I'll try not. No, that would be a mistake, I think.
Yeah, no kidding.
Especially I'll say hi to my friends in Worcester.
There you go. Just don't do it at a Sox Yankees game. That doesn't end well. Trust me. But anyway, so I play this little game called the Wicked Fun Part, if you're up for it.
Sure.
All right. So I'm just going to rapid fire you a few questions, pseudo, not really lean related, but just sort of a get to know you. I mean, not that people that listen to this podcast haven't heard you for 17 years, but maybe nobody's ever asked you these before.
I'm almost always the one asking someone else the questions. So,
right.
All right, let's do it.
All right, here we go. What'd you want to be when you were little?
I wanted to be a journalist, baseball writer, more specifically. A friend of mine, his dad did that. And to me, loving baseball, that was a dream job. And I still get to write books and blogging. It's not quite journalism, but there we have it.
Yeah, it's journalism adjacent, right?
Yeah.
How about what inspires you?
People shouldn't hate coming to work. That sounds like that sets the bar really low, but let's surpass that bar, and then we can work our way up in the hierarchy of needs. But I mean, I do mean that seriously, though. I mean, it's just we spend too much time at work for people to be miserable there. And so that's one common thread, no matter what kind of company or industry I've been in. People shouldn't hate coming to work.
Yeah, I reference Gallup surveys, and they haven't changed in many years. It's roughly 2/3 of employees either feel not engaged or actively disengaged from.
And don't let people fool you that this is recent and that this is because of COVID and that this is because of work from home. Nope. But see that be careful of people with 2 data points and an agenda.
There you go.
All these articles about, no, we got to get back to the office. I'm like, well, a lot of people disagree.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, slight tangent. The Great Resignation that was in all the news a year and a half, 2 years ago, that number comes from what they call the quits report. I've referenced that quits report for a decade.
Yeah.
It wasn't that far off from what it was during the Great Resignation. I mean, we were up around 4 million people quitting their jobs every month. Anyways, was it the highest during COVID and right after? Yes, it was, but not that much to put it in measures of success speak, right? It's within the noise of the data.
It might be. I'm going to hold that book up too. Every data set has a highest point ever. It doesn't mean that data point is a statistical signal or outlier.
Right. There you go. How about this one? What's one thing nobody knows about you?
One thing that nobody knows about me.
You got to keep it PG-13. This is a family show.
I mean, something that can we set the bar a little different? Something that most people?
Sure. Yeah, I'm assuming, your family knows pretty much everything, but let's say the average podcast listener.
Most people don't know. I mean, I see a pair of drumsticks sitting over here. It's not the juiciest answer you've gotten from anybody. Most people probably don't know that I also really love drumming, and I want to pick that up more again in adulthood. Maybe secondary job. Like I wish I could have been professional percussionist. But music and drumming, that's really important to me.
Nice. I'll look for that on YouTube. Do you have any drumming videos uploaded or nah?
No. I don't. But so I'm not just totally making something up. See, I've got a pair of drumsticks and I've got what I call a practice pad, which is basically like playing a snare drum. I would love to get an electronic drum kit though. Put on headphones like yours and try not to annoy the neighbors too badly.
Yeah, well, we have a Nintendo Wii and we have Rock Band, so it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah. I enjoyed Guitar Hero.
Yeah.
Back in the day, the home Guitar Hero setup. I never did the Rock Band setup with the drums. I should have.
You're missing out, Mark. I got to tell you.
Too much of a toy, though. I'm sure like real guitar players don't like playing Guitar Hero, maybe.
I saw a video once of Rush playing the Wii to one of their songs. And I mean, arguably one of the best bands ever. And I will argue that point because I have a lot of respect for them. But anyways, it didn't go well. But they were playing along with the whole shtick of the whole thing. But all right. How about what quality do you admire most in others?
I think, there's many. I'm going to tie it back into my book, available now, The Mistakes That Make Us. There's a couple of those characteristics. One is, again, someone in a leadership position being willing to say things like, I made a mistake, I don't know, I could be wrong, I was wrong. Like there's a really strong culture of that at KaiNexus. Software company I've been involved in a very part-time way for more than a decade. But that starts with, CEO Greg Jacobson, like the humility. I'm throwing a lot of different, not just actions, but traits. I think that's really key. And I think when somebody can react constructively to bad news, whether that news is related to mistakes or a problem, or those are a couple traits that come to mind and I kind of think illustrated by people's stories that I'm sharing in the book.
Nice. Last one. What superpower do you wish you had?
Superpower. I'll take flying.
Probably the number one answer.
Without giving that too much thought, I'll take flying.
Okay. Solid choice.
That sounds fun. I fly enough as it is in airplanes. So
right. All right. So, Mark, I wanted to wrap up a little bit. So you kind of mentioned it already. So when does the book officially come out?
Well, through the magic of recording and holding the episode, by the time I release it here, it's already available.
Okay.
June something or other-ish. Hopefully that forecast ends up not being a mistake. But by the time people are hearing this, the book is available now in paperback, Kindle format, hardcover format. Somebody wants that, a couple bucks more for the hardcover version. But available mainly through Amazon. People can learn more through my website, mistakesbook.com. We'll forward to the page where people can learn more, download sample material. People want to order signed copies or do a bulk order, they can do that through the website as well. So It's a mistake not going through some of that with you before we started recording, but so be it. We're 85% prepared for the episode. There's no need to go edit that. It's fine.
Yeah, I would have asked you that question right now anyways, right? Because it's a natural progression of the whole thing. And this is book, what, 4 for you? 5?
This is it. That's more complicated to answer than it should be. So I'll call this my third solo book, Lean Hospitals, then Measures of Success, and then this one, The Mistakes That Make Us. Co-authored a book with Joe Schwartz, Healthcare Kaizen, and then we did a variation of that book called The Executive Guide to Healthcare Kaizen. And then Practicing Lean had 15 other co-authors. So I guess the easiest way to answer it is third solo project. And then I've had some collaborations with other folks.
Nice. Congratulations. I mean, I haven't,
Thank you.
as you and I have chatted before, I co-wrote one.
Yeah.
And I have Katie Anderson, who was the only two-time guest on the New England Lean podcast, gave me one of her, dioramas. Here it is. Right. So I filled in the eye. Yep. Yeah. It kind of came out funny because I spun. Right. Yeah. So I have the one eye. So I set the goal, which is to write my book. And it's been like this for a few years now. Yeah. Regrettably. So Katie
also gave me, I had a Daruma for Measures of Success. This was my Daruma for The Mistakes That Make Us. And even though the writing is done, I haven't colored in the other eye because as publisher, to me, that other eye gets colored in when the book is actually on the market, available in people's hands. So we're getting there.
Nice. So what's on tap for the launch? Is this, are you renting out Madison Square Garden?
No.
Fireworks over,
Well, nothing like that. I did a book cover reveal online event with our mutual friend Elizabeth Swan. Mm-hmm. We kind of went through and showed, okay, here's the cover, told some of the story behind the cover and the iteration and that process. Plan on trying to think of the timing of when compared to this podcast being released. With KaiNexus, we're going to do a bit of an online launch event with kind of a panel discussion with me and some KaiNexus leaders about learning from mistakes and how do we cultivate that culture, if you will. Trying to do a lot of writing and getting articles placed in different places to try to promote the book, getting on other people's podcasts. No fun event where we're like renting out a distillery in Kentucky or Texas or anything, but maybe
with the Van Winkles.
No, well, we'll see. I mean, and then audiobook version, I think will be available later this year. I certainly do plan on producing the audiobook. My book coach said, "Oh, don't worry about trying to have that ready when the print book is available. It's not unusual for the audiobook to release later, and then that gives an excuse to do kind of a second launch."
Are you going to read it?
Yeah, for better or for worse. People want to hear my voice that long.
I listen to a lot of, I log a lot of windshield time. So I actually do listen to a lot of podcasts and audiobooks. And I always kind of like it when the author reads their own book because they really know these stories. And I feel like not only the energy comes through, but the intonation and it's pride. I don't know what to call it, but it feels better, I think. So congrats.
Authentic.
Yeah.
Maybe, right? So then there's a question of, I'm definitely going to work. It's like with the book, quote unquote, self-publishing. That's a mistake to really call it that. I'm going to partner with people who know what they're doing. And that could mean going to someone's studio and recording it, or it might mean I record it at home and send them the files and do the editing. The one advantage I think of being in a studio is that there's feedback loops. If I kind of mumble my way through a word and they can call it out and stop me and sorry to snap my fingers in front of the microphone, they would say, don't do that either. We can go back and record immediately as opposed to sending them a big batch. It's more expensive to go into the studio. And I think it's not just the sound quality, but I think the iteration cycles would be tighter and faster. Mm-hmm. So I might go do that.
Nice. Cool. Well, I hope you talk about that as you go through it or post on, LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'll share about that process.
Yeah.
I've shared mistakes that I've made along the way and shared iterations that have happened along the way. With writing the book and bringing it to be. I mean, again, it's like a book's like a startup. You better be ready to iterate because you probably don't have it all figured out up front. And be open to that and expect that and try not to get too discouraged with it, but keep moving forward.
There you go. All right, Mark. Well, thanks for allowing me to host and turn the tables on you a little bit. I really appreciate it. I hope you had fun.
I did. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, sure. And so yeah, I'll see you around online, I guess, until our paths cross at some point.
Yeah. Well, I'll look forward to seeing you in person again. Quick story though. Paul brought me in to do a workshop in, where was it? Central Massachusetts?
Yeah, it was like Boston proper.
It was a Measures of Success workshop. Do you remember the mistake I made? The
Yes, I
travel?
do.
I showed up to the hotel pretty late at night, even I think like 11 p.m. I think there had been some travel delays. I had forgotten to book the hotel and they were full. And the Motel 6 across the highway had a room, but there wasn't really a good way to walk there because it was like divided highway. And like, I think I whined and asked you to come. Did you come drive me? No, in the morning. I got an Uber, right, I think, to drive me, even though it wasn't very far. No, yeah, you picked me up the next morning. So my mistake, knowing the blame, but me.
It happens. But I was like, you know, there's a fair bit of stress because I mean, you're flying halfway around from the, you know, halfway
across
half the country away, right? To come up to Massachusetts, and I had to get the hotel and the conference room and lunch and all this coordination. And I just remember I went to bed and I'm like, okay, great. Mark's on a plane. He's on his way. And I wake up the next morning at like 5.
Yeah.
And I had all these frantic, like chronological texts from you at the hotel, forgot to book the room, looking now, and all this stuff. And I was already asleep. But yeah, I just remember I picked you up, and the highway was a 4-lane highway with a Jersey barrier with a chain link fence on top of it. So you physically couldn't get across the highway even if you wanted to. So, but it all worked out.
That's the one and only time I think I've forgotten to book a hotel for some sort of work like that. So where I'm going to read my coffee mug to myself here. Be kind to myself. I wasn't kind to myself at the time. I'm trying to get better at that. No one's perfect. We all make mistakes. The important thing is learning from our mistakes. And then I've actually changed the mug to add and helping others do the same.
Nice. I like it a lot. Cool.
Yeah.
All right, Mark. Well, good luck with the launch. I can't wait to read it.
All right. Thanks again. This was fun.
All right, bud.